My question for you is
Wait, wait,
define.
before you start, can we do some intro and context? Just
See,
like,
this is how hardcore I am. Okay, when I say hardcore, it's literally hardcore. Okay,
okay.
hi Amy.
Hi, everyone.
Nice to meet you. Well, I'm your interviewer today
Okay.
from OpenAI, and
We're starting good.
so we're gonna choose a product and define a success for that product, and we're also gonna do a little bit diagnose question. If one metric going down or going up, then we want to know how you think what happened. Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. Do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy. I am currently a product manager at LinkedIn. Throughout my time at LinkedIn, I've worked across LinkedIn feed, growing and redesigning our company pages, and I'm currently building a lot of marketing agents for our ads team. So, super excited to tackle this analytical question today.
I'm excited too. And your question today is define the success of GPT-5. And also, we saw number of chats per day increase, but the subscription sign up didn't increase at the expected level. What do you think happened?
So, I'm going to break this question down into two pieces. And so let's tackle the first question in terms of how I would define success for GPT-5. And then once we align on the success metrics, then we can diagnose the issue with the chats going up per day, but the subscriptions decreasing, right? Is
Yeah.
it decreasing or just not increasing at the same rate of the chats?
Not increase at the same level.
Okay, so not increasing at the same level. Okay, sounds good. So let me start with defining the North Star metric for GPT. I'm going to start by asking some clarifying questions just to make sure I understand the scope of the question. I am the PM for GPT as soon as it has launched, or
What do you mean as soon as it has launched?
like has it been out for a while, or is it just like something?
It just launched.
Okay, so recent launch.
Yeah, but you have been working on it for a while. Yeah, with the team, and right now it just launched for 2 weeks. That's how you saw the metrics movement. But before that, I want you to define the success first.
Got it. The reason I ask in terms of timeline is I want to figure out if our goal is to find product market fit or if we're just trying to scale engagement. I think the trade
Mm.
off is very different for each stage. So that's a good clarification. And then am I focused on the performance of GPT-5 for a specific market or geography, like a certain user or a certain country, or is it just global overall?
Global.
Do you mind if I take maybe 2 minutes just to write down some of my thoughts and structure out this
Yeah.
topic? I think I'm ready to start off by maybe clarifying the purpose of why we've built GPT-5. And then I'd like to walk through the funnel and maybe metrics I would track at each stage of interacting with this feature, and then end up on a official True North metric for this feature. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, in terms of why OpenAI would choose to build a product like GPT-5, just for context, right now, ChatGPT is the number one most used chatbot in the world, right? It has overtaken Google search in terms of where people identify the best places to go and ask questions about anything from academic research to maybe tailoring their resume, professional use cases, to even helping up with like productivity in their personal lives. Like, help me create a shopping list or help me plan my travel itinerary for my vacation next week. In terms of why the GPT-5 launch is very important to OpenAI, they have been launching a lot of updated models within the past, from like GPT-3 to 4 to 4.0 and now to 5. But there are three reasons why GPT-5's enhancement is a really significant launch. The first one is model performance, right? GPT-5 is supposed to be OpenAI's best model yet, with lower runtime, the ability to automatically identify which model you need to use for which use case. And so you no longer have to switch between models. It knows whether to go on thinking or auto, or another type of chat based off of what it detects as your best use case. I think the second one is customer impact. And so another reason why GPT-5 is really significant is there are now extended use cases on both consumer and enterprise applications. On the consumer side, you can use ChatGPT-5 to now build your own video game or build a website from scratch. And on the enterprise side, there are a lot of enhancements to the GPT API that a lot of companies can now use to quickly integrate maybe prototyping abilities for their company use cases as well. And I think the last thing to focus on here is increased trust and responsibility. In past models, there have been a lot more like hallucination rates, or you might have seen things on the internet where like GPT cannot count the number of bees in the word blueberry. And so a lot of those issues are now being decreased with this new model. And so this new model is supposed to have very good ability to citate references of where it got information from. And so I think these are like the top three enhancements that have launched with this new ChatGPT 5 model. And so, kind of walking you through the metric funnel of the types of metric that I would track at each stage, I think we'd start off with awareness, right? And so, what I mean by awareness is when you first go on to ChatGPT, a metric I would track here is the number of site visits. And so, how many people are visiting chatgpt.com? That's the first one. Along the next step of engagement, I think something I want to track is the amount of queries that are being asked to ChatGPT. So if people are prompting GPT and asking a question, I want to track the amount of questions being asked. Also, along that same line, I think number of like responses are very important. And so not only do I want to track how many people start the conversation, I want to see if they continue the conversation as well, right? And so when they respond, ChatGPT responds, and they respond again, that is like a re-engagement response metric that I'd want to track. Because I think if the quality of the output is good, then you'd want to continue the conversation with ChatGPT. And then along that same line of engagement, I think session time is something I would track as well. So if you think that the output is really good from GPT, I think you'd want to spend a longer time consulting it and chatting with it. And so if we see that users have a longer average session time on GPT-5 compared to earlier models, I think that would be a good sign as well. Moving on to the conversion part of the funnel, right? I think feature adoption is something that would be very important for me. So any of the new features that we've launched, whether it be image generation, the ability to generate a website, the ability to maybe prototype a video game, I'd want to track by like segment breakdown, like how many people are interacting and adopting these new features that we have. That way, it gives me a signal as a PM. Oh, people are using ChatGPT 5 to actually make a lot of websites, but only like 5 people are using it to build video games. And so maybe this video game feature isn't as hot as I thought it would be. In the future, it might make sense for me to de-invest from our video game prototyping feature and spend more time, right, investing in our website builder feature on GPT-5. Moving on to retention in the funnel, I think I'd want to track the amount of accounts created. So the fun thing with GPT is you actually don't need an account to ask ChatGPT any questions, but if you want to unlock the full set of features on ChatGPT, such as memory or the ability to recall questions you've asked over different times, things like that require you to make an account. And so if we are able to convince people to create an account with ChatGPT and OpenAI, I think that's also a really good sign of customer retention, as well as re-engagement. So re-engagement, not just within the same chat, but do they come back again on a different day to ask ChatGPT a different question about something different as well? In terms of guardrails, I think what I would monitor for ecosystem health is one, CSAT is very important. CSAT is short for customer satisfaction. And so for every output that GPT has a response for, there is like a thumbs up or a thumbs down rating. And so I'd want to track the ratio of thumbs ups to thumbs down responses on our outputs to confirm that this new model is releasing high quality output. And then one more thing I'd want to track is the deflection rate. And so essentially with every AI product, you want to see if people are going to escalate issues to maybe like a human representative. I know GPT doesn't have this option, but the closest proxy it does have is the ability to report an output as low quality or spam. And so I'd want to check the amount of outputs that are flagged in that case. And then this is a bit more nuclear, but let's say that your response that you're getting from ChatGPT is really, really bad. there might be people who delete their accounts, right, with ChatGPT. And so I'd want to also monitor if people are deleting their accounts as a sign of really strong negative reception. So, with all that being said, if I had to choose one true north metric, um, I would actually want to focus on re engagement for GPT-5. And the reason for that is because I think that's the closest for me to determine customer value is do they find enough value to come back and use GPT-5 again? And so my true north metric would be the amount of people who use ChatGPT 5 one time and then come back to engage with it at least a second time.
I have a question for you. You were saying that the number of responses from human is important. Can you explain further why it is important for human to respond? If I ask GPT something, it is useful. I probably do not continue the conversation.
Yeah, so I think that could be the case for certain tasks, right? And so let's say you say, okay, I want like a shopping list. Can you modify this and give me like a list that I can go shopping with? Naturally, GPT-5 is programmed to want to be helpful and provide you with follow-ups, right? Like, oh, do you want me to format this into like a actual shopping list that you can download? Do you want me to consider additional deals that the store is offering for you to add into your shopping list? And so I think GPT-5 is doing its job if it gives you what you want. But if it's able to come up with additional value that you didn't know that you could get in the first place, that's demonstrating more customer value than the customer is actually requiring from it. And I think that is a really good sign. At the same time, I do see how response rate could be a vanity metric because it could be like, oh, there's a lot of interaction back and forth messaging between the customer and GPT, but it's not necessarily a good thing because maybe they're trying to clarify the question to GPT or GPT is not understanding the question. So in that case, I think it's important to monitor response rate as both a guardrail, but also see it as a positive sign if there are increased responses between the user and the GPT, and then the output is getting graded as like high quality.
Mm. And also, previously, when you talk about the different areas of the metrics that you want to track, you talk about model performance, customer impact, company impact, and trust and responsibilities. Um, I think from what you just mentioned, you have a pretty good coverage on the customer impact. Company impact, we can leave it there because it is like enterprise use cases, and you probably can track through um, like similar format. Trust and responsibility you also mentioned. What metrics do you want to track on the model performance side?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think when I mentioned those three pillars of impact, I chose to focus on like customer value as the main output. But let's say I had to pivot and consider model performance as the main pillar that I'm measuring for. I think there are a couple of things that I might consider here. And so one thing I mentioned earlier was like in previous versions of ChatGPT, we saw a lot of hallucinations, right? Like it would count the number of bees in blueberry wrong. And so I think hallucination rate is something that we want to measure. I think another good metric here could be latency or like load time of responses. And so I know with like the new research mode that GPT-5 has, it might take longer to generate responses for certain users. And so I want to see if like with GPT-5, maybe with like more people using this feature with increased load, depending on each model, is it taking a significantly longer time for the answers to load? And the reason that's very important is that it could cause drop off if people are very impatient, right? Like let's say in GPT-4, it only took 1 second for your answer to load, but in GPT-5, it takes 10 seconds for your answer to load. 10 seconds is a long time, I think, for an average user consumer who is using this product. And so if that is taking a long time to load, it might result into drop offs. And so that's something I'd want to track as well. So I think for model performance, I think between the two, I think accuracy is more important to me because I think something with AI is that the most important thing to do with AI is to build customer trust. you can have your chatbot or agent generate like the most eloquent responses, but if customers don't have any trust with it, they're not going to use it. And so I think I would want to optimize for accuracy here as my true north. And so I would want to ensure like the hallucination rate is close to zero as my true north on model performance.
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. Should I move on to the second part of your question?
I have one more question.
Okay.
So you were just talking about for different product stages, the North Star that you are tracking is different. So can you talk more about right now your your true north is defined as re-engagement for GPT-5. If time like evolved, how does it change your true north?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a good question. So if time, so I'm operating under the assumption that time were to go on and OpenAI is not releasing any newer models, right? Like we are still operating like 3 years from now, GPT-5 is still the most recent model.
Mhm.
Okay. Mm, yeah, I think in that case, re-engagement is still something that I think is important. And the reason I originally chose it as a true north is I think it's actually quite a timeless feature that no matter how long this product were to exist, re-engagement is still a really good sign of success, right? Let's say like uh, Google has existed for decades now, but I'm sure a success metric that Google PM still measure is like, do people ask questions on Google and come back another day to use it? But I think something else that would be interesting to consider on a macro is OpenAI's share of the market, maybe compared to other chatbots that will exist. I think in a couple of years, there will be additional AI chatbots or search tools that will exist. And I would be curious to track if like we are still dominating the market in this space. And so I think something I would be more curious to track is like user acquisition and retention metrics in that scenario. And so um, for GPT-5, like, are an increasing amount of people actually using this feature? And as a retention metric, like, I think re-engagement is still something I'd want to measure. Are we keeping the users who are using GPT-5 on GPT-5? Or are they pivoting to like a hot new AI chatbot app, or maybe going back to Google search or something like that? And so I think
Mm,
I would keep re-engagement with an added measure of, I think, user acquisition is something I care a lot about.
got it. Last question, I promise. Last question
Okay.
before we dive into the second part. You were saying that, which is also true, that people do not need to create an account to use GPT-5. Um, and how can you count the number of users using GPT-5 the second time?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So actually clarifying question here. Are we allowed to store information about users based off of their like uh maybe their cookies, browser cookies, site sessions, or their IP address?
Mm. So, as the interviewer from OpenAI, I will not like answer that question. Uh, but you basically are telling me that you want to use this type of signals like browser ID or like IP address to make sure it is the to identify the same user as much as possible.
Yeah, so I think there are ways to track re-engagement, and we can break this down into two types of users, right? So one, users who do have a ChatGPT account, and two, users who currently do not have a ChatGPT account. And so
Mm,
for the users who do have a ChatGPT account, it's very easy for me to track re-engagement because I just look at the account ID and see if the same user has logged on to ask a question or interact with the app again. And I think I would be more creative, right? For those who do not have an account, I would look for the same IP address who has used ChatGPT and re-engage with it again, or try to store like cookies or browser information just to see if it's the similar user that's coming back. I know there are some compliance issues with like GDP, GDPR, like EU, and a lot of the recent cookie legislation laws, and so I think those are some workarounds that I would work with to track your engagement.
Sounds good.
Mhm. Cool. Okay, I am going to move on to the second question, which is, let's say chats per day increased, but subscriptions have not increased at the same level, right, per day.
Yeah.
And so when we say this, a clarifying question here I have is subscriptions are still increasing, just not at the same rate.
Yeah.
Some other questions I have here are, do you have any information about the time frame of this? Is this something that we're monitoring? Um, I know you said this is like a recent launch, and so this is something that we've monitored over like the past 2 weeks that this product has launched, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So ever since launch. And then just wanting to clarify the definition of how we measure this metric today. Um, Chats per day, is that someone who asks ChatGPT a question, ChatGPT responds? We count that as a chat.
Yeah. So here we define the chat as literally the chat on the chat GPT.com. So we do not identify users here. So we just at a very macro level, the number of chats increase. But we don't see the same number of subscription increased.
Okay, so chat plus response volume has increased. And then number of subscriptions per day. So when we say subscriptions, do you mean people who create accounts or people who purchase ChatGPT?
People who purchased.
Okay, so this would require making an account, right? And then
Mhm.
also upgrading to
Yeah.
GPT Pro. I don't know if they still call it GPT Pro anymore, but that's great to know. Okay. And then if we have any benchmarking information, I'm curious. I think this would be good context for me to know. Did we see something like this happen with ChatGPT 4 as well during the initial launch, or is this like a abnormal behavior that we're just seeing with the new launch of GPT 5?
I think for GPT-4, we were still starting to understand what is the relationship between chats and subscription. So we don't really have full established relationship saying like 10% of sign up increase usually translate to 1% of subscription increase. We don't have that ratio yet. But it is just previously we have this whole like impact sizing that we thought at least we could have let's just like make up numbers here. We thought we could have like 5% of subscription sign up increase, but we didn't see that number. Um, so that's why we're wondering what went wrong and if there is anything that we can further bump that number.
Okay, sounds good. I think I have enough information to get started. And then I'm curious, just for this exercise, do you have an answer in mind that you would like me to land on, or do you just want to understand how I would approach solving this problem?
I just want to understand how you think.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to just break down how I would like to approach this problem, if that's okay. Okay, thank you so much for the time. So I think how I would like to approach this is first breaking down the metric to isolate the metric drop, or understand not the metric drop, but why it's not increasing, right, at the same scale. And then walk you through some like separate environmental versus product driven effects of this metric, and then end up with maybe like my hypotheses on like what are the three most likely root causes of this happening, what the data I would need would be to validate my hypotheses, and then if I were a PM here, what are the actions that I would take going forward to mitigate this issue?
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's start off by breaking down this metric. What I would do if I knew that the amount of chats per day were going up and the number of subscriptions were not going up at the same rate is first, I'd want to try to see if I could break down this metric by a couple of dimensions. The first one would be by geography, right? And so since this is a global launch, I'd want to see, is this issue happening specifically within the US, the EU, APAC? And maybe that can help me understand, this could be like a cultural like issue. This could be something related to like the country. Something else that would be interesting to me is breaking this down by platform. So iOS, Android, and desktop. That way can help me narrow down to maybe this is like a bug specifically on mobile that we have, versus like maybe the desktop experience is not that responsive. And so maybe this is an issue particularly for desktop users. I think the last thing that would be really interesting for me to measure from a dimension perspective is acquisition source. And what I mean by that is how do people land on maybe upgrading to GPT Pro today, right? Do we send them like an upsell email saying, hey, like you could get so many more features here if you sign up for GPT Pro? Do we send them like a notification while they're using the free version of ChatGPT? Is it, organic visit to the site and then all of a sudden like something happens in the flow? And I think understanding the acquisition source could also help me pinpoint why we are not essentially like effectively upselling people to GPT-5. Going forward, I think there are some internal versus external root causes that I would like to explore with you. So I think the first one, let's go on the internal side, could be bug deployments, right? And so something that could be very common is the engineering team ships out this release and they missed like a bug in production that's actually like taking down maybe the sign up flow for GPT Pro, or it's taking out like some issue with like erroring in the billing or checkout flow. And so you can't, even though you want to, purchase GPT Pro. I think another thing we could look at is the product changes in GPT-5 since GPT-4, because I think that could point to maybe some like UI tweaks, algorithm updates, or setting changes that make users not want to maybe upgrade to GPT Pro for this new model compared to the old one. And then I think another good thing to visit is like pricing changes, right? Like with the new model that we launched, did we actually make GPT Pro a lot more expensive? And so let's say in the past, GPT Pro was like $5.99 per month. Maybe we increase the price to $10 per month. And that is like the threshold for a lot of people not wanting to pay for this tool. And so I think any pricing changes here, especially since it's like a monetized feature, would be really good to track. And then I think the last but not least, like I'd want to consider if we have started offering more value within the free version of GPT compared to the paid version. And so let's say in the past, like a lot of features were only for paid members, but these days we are actually like GPT-5 as is, the free version is offering already so much value that people don't feel the need to pay for GPT Pro. I think that's how I feel about GPT right now. Like I am a free user because I think it does the job enough for me and I don't really need like the GPT Pro additional perks. And so I think that could also be a reason why someone wouldn't want to upgrade. I think external factors we can measure here are one, competition. Like there have been like YC's like new batch of startups, like so many of them are like creating an AI chatbot, right? And so maybe a lot of users are like, oh, like I'm talking to GPT and like, we're having a lot of chats and like this is really interesting, but why should I pay for this service when there's like another smaller bespoke application that gives me more of a personalized service? Also, I think something to monitor is like press. Uh, as soon as GPT-5 launched, I think it was a bit of a flop in the market, I will say. There are a lot of posts on LinkedIn, on TechCrunch saying, actually, GPT-5 isn't that good. And so that could discourage a lot of users from paying for it, right? Maybe they chat with GPT-5 and they're like, oh yeah, the influencers were right. Like it's actually not that good. And so they try it out, they think the capabilities are kind of disappointing and they choose not to pay for the pro version. Another thing I would usually consider is seasonality. I think right now that doesn't feel like the case, but just throwing a hypothesis out there, maybe it's summer, people are in Europe, they're not using ChatGPT, right? And so even if they use it once or twice to like figure out what like menu item they should order or like translate this from French to English for me, they're not going to be upgrading to GPT Pro. And then I think the last thing I would want to keep in the back of my head are if there are any regulations that are new that have recently passed in the market, preventing maybe GPT from accessing some users' personal data. then I think GPT could just not have like a very personalized answer to a lot of people's queries, and they don't feel compelled to upgrade to Pro because they aren't impressed with the current level of output that the free version is providing. So, with that being said, I'm happy to pick like my top three root causes, but wanted to ask you to see if there's anything you think I might have missed.
Um, I think it is pretty comprehensive here. Yeah, what's your hypothesis?
Yeah. Mm, yeah. So, considering how you mentioned this metric was essentially measured since like the most recent launch, right? So I think if it was an external cause, it would more likely have a longer time frame of impact. So it takes a long time for like a competitor's product or things like seasonality regulations to actually influence the product metrics directly. And so if it was something that we measured over a longer period of time, I would be more inclined to state that there is an external root cause driving this. But because we've measured this in a short period of time, I feel like a pretty solid conviction that it's an internal root cause that's like causing this issue. So within the internal root causes that I've identified, I think the easiest one for me to investigate is the pricing change, and that's where I would start off first to see if we've increased the price of GPT Pro and if that is dissuading a lot of users from renewing their subscription or from starting a new subscription to GPT. So so essentially the data I would need here to drive this hypothesis is just knowing the price change, right, from the current plan from the previous plan. I think the second one I would want to check out as a potential root cause is the product change since GPT-4. With the new launch of GPT-5, do we think like a lot of the more premium or pro features are actually worth paying for, right? And so check out the new functionality, investigate the feature adoption there, and see whether or not that is like a inflection point for a lot of these customers. And I think the data that I would need to collect here is just um, the capabilities of the new model that the old model couldn't do, and which one of them are paywalled. So which one of them is only accessible to pro members. And then just for coverage, if I were to choose one external root cause, I would investigate the press issue because I think there has been a lot of hype and commotion on a lot of websites around GPT-5 not being like a really, really impressive launch. And so I think that press swayed public perception very easily, especially if you're living in like the tech bubble. And so I think the data that I would need here is maybe like I'd want to collect like the top posts or news articles saying like GPT-5 wasn't impressive and try to line up the time frame of like those articles being published versus like the drop in terms of not as many people purchasing subscriptions. So yeah, I think that is how I would get the data to validate my hypotheses for my top three root causes.
Yeah, sounds good. Do you have any other follow-ups, comments?
Um, No, I think that's it. I think if we were to talk about maybe actions going forward, like I said, first, I would just validate the pricing changes. I think product changes would work with maybe like the UI uh, design team and like the engineering team to see like what functionalities are really different and maybe do like a
Mm.
UXR interview with a lot of the some customers that we can have an interview for. And then external, I think I would just ask like a lot of our like PR team to do some competitor analysis or research on these articles, and then do like a maybe like comparison of the time frames the articles are being launched. But I think how I would mitigate this is having like a really strong PR strategy of like, actually, here are some people who have said like GPT-5 has performed really well. Like we invited some influencers to test out our product and they were super, super impressed. So having like a really like positive PR campaign response. And then if it's a pricing issue, we can maybe readjust the pricing to be more approachable to the market. And then if it's a product change issue, we can revert product changes where we see negative flags.
Mhm. Yep.
Awesome.
We're ready for feedback.
You're not going to ask me, oh, Amy, how would you give yourself feedback? What would you think of your answer?
Yeah, usually I ask that question because I'm still preparing for your feedback, but like this time I'm already prepared.
All right.
I think for the first part of your question, um, I would um first in the clarifying question, I would like expect you to ask more about product verticals, like consumer and or enterprises, whether it is GPT store, so you can like narrow the question down.
Yeah.
Or are we just like literally just talking about this model, right? If we talk about this model, then we probably want to emphasize more on the model performance metrics instead of user flow. If we narrow it down to a specific vertical, then we can focus more on the like user flow than model performance. So that's one clarified question that I would add. I think it is very helpful for you, as always, like always talk about how you want to approach this question. This is very clear with the interviewer and also give the interviewer a vibe of we are going to work on this together. I like when you say like, oh, let's work on this together. It makes me feel
Me too. Part of the team.
part of the team. Um, I think I asked you a follow-up question on the number of human responses. I think that is a hard question, and um, and one thing that I would think is possible, which I don't know whether the major labs are doing this, is I think you kind of trying to tackle this question by saying like there are multiple use cases, and for different use cases there might be like, oh, whether it is necessary for the human to respond back. So I would like you kind of touch on this, but I would expect you to dive a little bit deeper to say like, oh, there are several use cases here. Maybe for some of the use cases we don't expect them to follow back. Maybe I just want to see for these use cases whether the human respond back, right? Specifically, let's say for therapist issue or for just like companion issue, right? That is the kind of use cases that you expect a back and forth conversation. So that is there is that. Um, and for I added a follow-up question to ask you the model performance metrics. And I think here I would expect you to um, maybe give an overlook, um, give an overview of what are the major use cases or what are the major performance metrics that we are tracking so far. So for example, when we when it comes to model performance metric, usually we look at like coding or like tool use or like context, right? Or medical use cases, which GPT or OpenAI has always been very proud of their medical use cases, or developer task, right? Like these are the or creative writing, right? These are the major use cases that GPT or OpenAI is famous for. And now we are competing all these metric or these dimensions with our previous O3 model, which is like how they talk in the press, and with other competitors, right? There are a lot of like what you said from the press. There are a lot of rumors saying, "Oh, you competed with your previous model because your previous model is too bad," and and is that it for OpenAI? You just compete with your previous one, right? There are different ways to frame this. You could also say that, oh, we don't really care about what other competitors are doing because they're way behind us, right? So um, yeah, you probably want to talk about all the use cases and within each category, what are the metrics that you want to track. So basically, dive deep a step deeper to talk about what do you mean by accuracy, right? And when I asked you the question, because you previously say for different product stages, you want to track different true north, that's why I added that question. I think it would be easier for you to say, oh, before a launch, I probably want to track different metrics. I think that was why you you brought it up, saying like different product stages track different north stars. But later, because like we kind of just like talk about over the time. So like you're like, oh, then do I change metric? Actually, there is a like better way to answer this question, which is how you define re-engagement, right? Because currently you define re-engagement as the user's second use. Over time, you probably have more confidence on users' second use. You probably want to track daily usage, something like that, right? So with the maturity of the product, it is just funny that you just dig a hole for yourself in the answer. Um, but yeah, the easier way is to say how you define re-engagement. Um, and also, I added a question about how do you count the same user using GPT for the second time? Your answer is pretty smart there. Track their interviewer there. So yeah, I think that is a very good answer. Um, so those are my major feedback for the first part. For the
Yeah.
second part, I think it is more in your comfort zone than the first part. I feel like the first part you kind of forget about. Oh, let me remind myself, what was the first time that I used GPT? So you kind of like go through the user flow and you forget some of the steps. But for the second diagnose, I feel like you're more in your comfort zone. Um,
Interesting.
one, yeah, one thing that I want to point out, um, there are so many things that you did very good in the answer. For example, how do you want to do the breakdown, the internal, external issues, and you covered it pretty comprehensively. And you also saying making account or upgrading. And I really appreciate when you say that how to mitigate the PR problem to contact some influencers and brainwash the public.
Yeah,
It's good.
actually just JJ to mitigate this issue. I would just have her make a vlog about this, and I think that could mitigate our PR issue.
Yeah, this is a open door for OpenAI, Anthropic, any kind of collaboration. I'm a little influencer. We can talk about the collab. One thing that I think could be like a cherry on the top is at the beginning of this question, I would want to narrate. I would want to break it down to see whether it is an issue for us. Because right now, if we're talking about subscription, right, we are basically just talking about consumer. But it is really that we something that we care about, right? If consumer, let's say we expect $16 million from consumer subscription, then it is, let's say 55, right? Maybe the enterprise side got like $10 more million for us. So
Mhm.
probably it's not an issue anymore. Why are the consumers not subscribing? Maybe they can get the same offering from their education from their schools, right? So that's why they individually are not subscribing. So I think if you added that on the top, or this is one way to break it down: enterprise, consumer, different type of verticals within the company. On the other side, between different models, right? They just launched an open source before the GPT-5. So whether people are using open source more rather than GPT-5. So or when you are tracking competitors, right? I still want you to like talk about the major use cases first, so you can like show off what you know about the major models. So for example, for GPT models, these are the major use cases that users use GPT models for. Then let's keep track of like YC or other competitors or other new startups, whether they're tackling the same problem and maybe using our open source model, right? So that will explain a lot. So yeah, that will be my major feedback.
Yeah, I think the overall theme of the feedback is just like make your life easier by narrowing down the scope of the question, right? Like
Yeah.
I think narrowing it down between enterprise or consumer, narrowing it down between like certain industries or verticals. I think when I originally asked the question, I was trying to gauge like, oh, from like a user perspective or a geo perspective, and you're like, oh, globally. And so maybe that caused me to think like, okay, I'm just going to consider everything in the scope of the
Mm,
question. But I think it is very good feedback because like how I would measure or diagnose like amount of subscriptions would be very different across consumer and enterprise, right? Like
yeah.
businesses and companies not renew with us versus individual consumers not renew with us is like a very different segmented problem. So I think that's very valid feedback. And yeah, I think the OSS like launch is very creative to call out. Like I didn't think of the open source model at all. So that would have been brownie points if I could have mentioned that in my answer.
Mm. I think it's very similar with how LinkedIn do things. Like if premium doesn't earn as much money, maybe users are just staying off feed and look at ads more. So it won't be a problem for LinkedIn as a company.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that you said I was more comfortable with the second type of question than the first one because the second one actually I think for me is very new because I'm not and I have never been like a monetization PM. So like I don't really know much about like upsells or like converting users to like a paid subscription. So I try to do the best I could in that area. But I guess the comfort area that came out was like diagnosing metric drops or like why something isn't performing. I'm like, oh, I'm used to this. And so maybe I think that's
Yeah.
what it was.
I feel like you're very confident in your diagnosis. I don't think if the interviewer, let's just say they're working on subscription at OpenAI, they won't focus that much on like, oh, you know, all the positions of the upsells, you know, all their like acquisition channels. I think that will be too much. Even people joining their team, they don't keep track of all the channels if it is too much.
Yeah.
So as long as you mention this, I think it is already good enough. If you're like talking more on the detail side, that sounds like an upsell team, what the upsell team would do. For example, like whether whether there is a change on screen size and punch your CTA down to the first screen kind of thing. That would be too detailed for an interview question.
Yeah, that's fair. Awesome. So, JJ, would you recommend me to the hiring team? Would you pass me to the next session or would you be like redo this?
I will put Amy Rue's name to every outreach I have with any OpenAI people. Okay, saying do not hire me, hire Amy Rue. She is the best.
Wow, that's crazy. I'll make sure to just cut that part out and put it in my resume. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay.